Stop for a moment and imagine this. You're sitting in your living room, completely still, when you feel a strange tingling sensation spreading through your limbs. You look down and notice your fingers are slightly puffier than usual. You shrug it off, assuming it's just a bit of swelling. But then your hands begin to grow, not in the sense of gaining weight. No, they are actually expanding in size, like soft dough rising in an oven. Your arms stretch outward, your torso begins to round, and within minutes, you are lifting off the ground, your toes barely grazing the carpet. You are inflating like a human balloon. Now, before you dismiss this as pure fantasy, consider this. Your body is already filled with air and gases.
Your lungs, your digestive tract, even the spaces between your cells contain gases that could theoretically expand. But what would actually happen if your entire body inflated like a balloon? Not just your stomach, your skin, your muscles, your bones, everything. This is a question that touches on the deepest principles of physics, biology, and anatomy. It forces us to ask, what are we really made of? What holds us together? And where is the line between a fascinating thought experiment and a terrifying biological nightmare? Let's begin by examining the logistics. To inflate like a balloon, something needs to fill you up with gas. But where would that gas come from? Balloons are filled with helium, air, or sometimes hydrogen.
But inside your body, you already have gases circulating in your bloodstream and accumulating in your intestines. In theory, if those gases expanded rapidly, perhaps due to a sudden change in pressure, temperature, or some unknown chemical reaction, they could cause your tissues to swell. But there's a catch. Your body is not a rubber balloon. It is a complex network of bones, muscles, organs, and connective tissues. Each of these structures has a specific density, a specific elasticity, and a very specific breaking point. Let's start with your skin. Human skin is remarkably elastic. It can stretch significantly. Just look at the changes that happen during pregnancy or significant weight gain. The skin contains proteins called collagen and elastin, which give it strength and flexibility.
But even the most elastic skin has its limits. If you expand it to just twice your normal size, your skin would need to stretch to roughly double its original surface area. That is a massive demand, and at a certain point, the collagen fibers would begin to tear, leading to stretch marks, or worse, complete rupture. But skin is just the outer layer. Beneath it lies your entire muscular system. Muscles are designed to contract and relax, not to stretch permanently. If your muscles were forced to expand, their fibers would separate, tearing apart the delicate arrangement of actin and myosin filaments that allow them to function. This would not only be excruciating, it would render you completely immobile. You would not be a floating balloon, you would be a helpless, expanding blob of torn tissue. And then there is the skeleton. Your bones are the rigid framework that holds everything together. They are composed of calcium and collagen, and while they have some flexibility, they are not designed to expand. If your bones grew larger, they would have to somehow absorb additional minerals or increase in volume, something that is biologically impossible in a matter of minutes. Instead, the more likely scenario is that your bones would crack under the pressure. Joints would dislocate, ribs would fracture, and your skull, which is the most rigid part of your skeleton, would create a fixed chamber that would compress your brain against the inside of your cranium. So, assuming you somehow survived the initial expansion, let's move on to the next question. What happens to your internal organs? Your heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys are all packed tightly within your chest and abdominal cavities. These organs are designed to work in a specific environment with specific pressures. If you inflated, those cavities would expand, creating negative pressure and disrupting normal function. Your heart would struggle to pump blood effectively because the blood vessels would be stretched thin, and your blood pressure would plummet. Your lungs would fill with gas, but they would also be compressed by the expanding abdominal contents pushing upward. Breathing would become shallow, difficult, and eventually impossible. Your digestive tract will be a particularly chaotic area. The intestines contain gas already, that's what causes bloating. But in an uncontrolled expansion, that gas would multiply, stretching the intestinal walls to their breaking point. Perforation, or tearing of the intestinal wall, would be almost certain. The bacteria inside your gut would then escape into your abdominal cavity, leading to a massive, life-threatening infection. Now, at some point during this expansion, something miraculous might happen. You might actually start to float. This brings us to the physics of buoyancy. An object floats in air when its overall density is less than the density of the surrounding air. A normal human body has a density roughly equivalent to water, about 1 gram per cubic centimeter. Air has a density of roughly 0.001 grams per cubic centimeter. That means you need to displace a tremendous amount of air to become buoyant. Specifically, you would need to expand to a volume that reduces your overall density below that of air. To put it simply, you would need to become enormous. Imagine your body, which might normally occupy about 65 liters of volume, inflating to something closer to 65,000 liters. That is roughly the size of a small room. At that scale, you would be so large that you would displace enough air to generate a buoyant force equal to your own weight. And just like that, you would begin to rise. But here's where it gets even more interesting. As you rise, the atmospheric pressure decreases. The air becomes thinner. And according to Boyle's law, as the pressure decreases, the volume of a gas increases, so you would expand even more. This is exactly what happens to a balloon as it rises into the atmosphere. As you climb higher, you expand further, and your rate of ascent would accelerate. It would be a terrifying feedback loop of growth and upward motion. But the atmosphere is not a friendly place. At about 5,000 meters, the air is thin enough to cause hypoxia, or oxygen deprivation. You would start to feel dizzy, confused, and lightheaded. At 10,000 meters, the temperature drops to around minus 50 degrees Celsius. Your exposed skin would freeze rapidly. At 20,000 meters, the pressure is so low that the water in your tissues would begin to vaporize, a phenomenon known as ebollism. Your body fluids would literally start to boil, even at body temperature. And what about the sunlight? At high altitudes, the sun's ultraviolet radiation is much stronger because there is less atmosphere to filter it. Your skin, already stretched to its limits, would be bombarded with UV rays, causing severe burns and DNA damage. Now, let's talk about the inevitable end. Eventually, you would reach a point where your expansion is so great that your tissues simply cannot hold together. The skin would tear, the muscles would separate, and you would rupture, much like a balloon popping. But remember, in the vacuum of the upper atmosphere, there is no air to carry sound, so your end would be silent. A silent, floating burst of organic matter drifting through the upper stratosphere. Of course, there is another way this scenario could play out. Instead of inflating continuously, your body might reach a state of equilibrium. At a certain altitude, the temperature and pressure might stabilize enough to halt your expansion. You would remain suspended, a massive human balloon drifting in the upper atmosphere, circling the globe with the jet streams. You might stay there for days, weeks, perhaps even months, slowly leaking gas as your tissues deteriorate. But even in this scenario, survival is impossible. Your body requires a constant supply of oxygen, nutrients, and water. Without these, your cells would begin to die. Your brain would be the first to suffer, followed by your muscles and organs. You would be a floating ghost, a human-shaped vessel carrying nothing but memories. Now, let's step back from this grim trajectory and consider the slightly more optimistic possibility. What if we could control it? What if we had evolved a biological mechanism to regulate our volume, like a balloon, inflating and deflating at will? This is not entirely outside the realm of biological possibility. There are animals that inflate themselves as a defense mechanism. Pufferfish, for example, rapidly fill their stomachs with water to appear larger and more intimidating to predators. Frogs can puff up their throats to amplify their calls. Some marine invertebrates can inflate their bodies to control their buoyancy. If humans had evolved this ability, it would have required a complete redesign of our anatomy. We would need a gas storage organ, similar to a swim bladder in fish, but much larger and more complex. We would need a sealable skin surface that could expand without tearing. Our bones would likely be hollow or made of a more flexible material. Our circulatory system would need to adapt to pressure changes, and our nervous system would need to monitor volume and density constantly. that evolution doesn't work on command. It works through random mutation and natural selection. The fact that we are here, solid and grounded, suggests that our ancestors did not benefit from the ability to inflate. Stability, not buoyancy, was the evolutionary advantage. So why are we even asking this question? What is the value of a thought experiment like this? Because it forces us to think about limits. It forces us to appreciate the incredible engineering that is our human body. Every bone, every muscle, every organ has evolved over millions of years to work within a specific range of pressures, densities, and temperatures. The fact that we cannot inflate is not a design flaw. It is a design feature. It also reminds us of the beauty of constraint. A balloon without air is just a limp piece of rubber. It achieves its purpose only when filled, but it is completely dependent on the gas inside it. A human, by contrast, is self-contained, self-sustaining, and capable of incredible things without needing to float away. But let's not stop at the biological. Let's think about the social and psychological impact of such a scenario. If humans could inflate and float, what would that mean for how we live? Would we build tethered cities? Would we have laws about altitude limits? Would there be floating zones in public spaces where people could drift freely without colliding? Would it be seen as a sign of peace, like meditation? Or would it become competitive, like racing to see who could reach the highest altitude? Imagine a world where transportation involves simply inflating a bit and drifting with the wind. You wouldn't need roads, cars, or bridges. You would just float. But then you would also have the problem of wind direction. What if you wanted to go north, but the wind was blowing south? You would be at the mercy of the weather. And what about storms or birds or power lines? The logistics of a floating society would be nightmare. There is also the question of dignity. Right now, we have control over our bodies. We stand, we sit, we walk. We have a sense of gravity and stability. To float would be to surrender control. You would be at the mercy of the atmosphere, drifting wherever it took you. For some, that might feel liberating. For others, it would feel terrifying. Let's consider one more angle, the environmental impact. If everyone on Earth suddenly inflated and floated away, what would happen to our infrastructure? Our buildings, our cars, our livestock, all would be left behind. Ecosystems would collapse. Crops would go unharvested. Cities would become ghost towns. It would be a crisis of unprecedented proportions. But perhaps the most profound question is this: if we could inflate and float, would we still be human? Our humanity is tied to our physicality, our weight, our density, our groundedness. To float away would be to leave behind not just the earth, but a fundamental part of what it means to be human. Now, let's bring this back to the real world. Why do we find this question so compelling? Why does the idea of inflating like a balloon capture our imagination? Because it touches on the universal human desire to escape, to be lighter, to be free of the weight of our responsibilities, our worries, our past, to float above it all and see the world from a distance. It is a metaphor for transcendence. But the reality, as we have seen, is that inflation is not transcendence. It is breakdown. It is rupture. It is the loss of integrity and form. Our bodies are not designed to float. They are designed to stand, to walk, to run, to hold, to build, to love, to stay. So the next time you feel the weight of the world pressing down on you, remember your bones, remember your muscles, remember the incredible structure that keeps you solid and grounded. You are not a balloon. You are something far more resilient, far more complex, and far more beautiful. And if you ever feel the urge to float away, take a deep breath instead. Feel your lungs expand. Feel your diaphragm contract. Appreciate the fact that you are filled with air right now, but only in the places where you are meant to be. Because being human is not about lightness. It is about presence. It is about connection. It is about the firm, solid, weighty reality of being alive. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the absurd, the scientific, and the deeply human. Stay grounded, stay curious, and never stop asking what if.